Hello, my name is Robert King, your certified project management professional, and today we'll be covering the basics of project management. Within the basics, we'll cover three things. Number one, the overall structure of the project, which we'll call the project lifecycle. Number two, we will look at the two major frameworks, predictive and agile, for planning and executing a project. And number three, we'll discuss how you can prepare to become certified in project management through the PMI, the Project Management Institute. Let's begin. Within projects, there are three major components that we as managers can control and observe. There's the scope of a project, or the specific desired end product. There's the schedule of the project, the beginning and the end time of when the project will occur. And thirdly, there's the cost. How much money will it cost? How much human resources will you need? What technology? What software? Scope, schedule, and cost are your three major components for success of a project. But just because we know the three major components, the real question is, how do we start a project? And this is where we get into the project life cycle, or the phase life cycle approach. All projects go through this type of approach. We initiate a project, we plan, we execute, we monitor and control, and then we close the project. And because all projects go through these 5 stages of a cycle, you would think that it's a rigid structure. But actually it's not. We also have 10 knowledge areas that run throughout the project. Why are they needed? Well, not all projects follow the same flow. At some areas where you have been planning, you might also need to be executing at the same time based off the needs of the business. There are approximately 10 knowledge areas that are not inclusive to each phase of the project. They are managed at each stage based off the needs of the organization. You have integration, you have scope, you have schedule, you have cost management, you have quality, you have resource, communication management, risk, procurement, and stakeholder management. And within those 10 knowledge areas, you create a management plan and you combine those into your essential project management plan. Now, I know this is a lot, but since we've lightly covered the phase life cycle approach and the 10 knowledge areas, let's take a look at how they apply to both the predictive and the agile methods of running a project. Again, the two major frameworks for managing a project are predictive and agile approaches. Take a look at this diagram. Consider this to be a roadmap of the predictive planning structure. So in order to better understand it, we'll first identify the phases of the life cycle within the planning process. The areas highlighted in green represent when you are initiating a project. You have received the business documents, which has your business case and the needs of the organization. And now it's your job to plan out how the project's going to happen in order to meet the business needs. The area highlighted in blue is where you do your planning. The purpose of doing predictive planning is a waterfall type approach, which means we follow a sequential predefined pattern. So notice how we haven't talked about the execution, the monitoring and control, or the closing of the project yet. You plan those things out before you even begin to execute the project. So now that we've talked about the life cycle, let's take a look at where the knowledge areas are. So when you see this section here on how we plan to manage the project, when we integrate our plan, we're developing a plan of plans. This is where we receive guidance from the Project Management Institute, which is where we define our configuration, our change management plan, and our compliance management plan. When we talk configuration management plan, we're talking about the changes that might or might not be made to the deliverable or the product of the project. In software development, you might have a version 1.01. However, as the project begins to continue and get updated, the software might be in version 1.02 by the time you're finished. You have planned to change your configuration of the product. When we discuss change management, we're talking about changes relating to the project and product scope, but we're actually discussing how we're going to control the change that is made throughout the product. Will there be a change control board? What type of governance structure will we have? In terms of governance structure, what will be the order of hierarchy with where decisions are made? Are decisions made at the lowest level with the team, or at some decisions made with you as the manager, or even higher with senior leadership? It depends per project. And when we talk compliance management, we keep up with all the laws and regulations based on the field of the project that we're working in. And this is how we integrate our project. We control the deliverables, we control the change, and we control how well we meet the compliance standards. The scope is the defined product, service, or result. Within the scope, you need to know what your requirements are. And not only that, you need to control how the scope will change. What we're trying to avoid is scope creep. As the project progresses, the requirements of the project continue to grow. Now, when we get into cost, we have the cost management plan. In a predictive style, usually there's a set budget for what we'll do. What we plan to spend, we either spend or save money on. How do you define quality? Is a car fast? Is a car slow? What defines fast? Is it the amount of acceleration, 0 to 60 in 5 seconds? Or is it maximum speed, being able to reach speeds of 250 miles per hour? In either case, quality can be subjective unless we give it defined values. And as a project manager, you are aiming to make a high quality product. You need to have very specified values for what you're going to grade your product on. When we have our resource management plan, resources are not just pieces of equipment. This comes with managing people, internal to your project, external to your project. You could consider them to be either team members or outside vendors, the software that we'll be using for the project, and we'll also determine when we need the resources. Do we need the resources for the entire amount of duration of the project, or do we only need resources for a certain period of time? Your communication management plan is your document for how you plan to send and receive information between stakeholders. For example, the military has a framework for communication management. It's called the PACE plan: primary, alternate, contingency, and emergency. Your primary method of communication might be a weekly meeting, or the daily stand-up, or an email chain. Either way, as long as that's communicated among the team, as long as the team knows what the communication management plan is, they can then expect how they're going to receive their information. Your stakeholder engagement plan is your strategy for how you're going to communicate with stakeholders at different levels of power and interest. Different stakeholders have different priorities, so you have to identify your stakeholders. You have to identify how you're going to add and take away stakeholders, and then you also have to identify which communication methods are preferred based off of your stakeholder groups. Your stakeholder engagement plan is a more tailored approach based off of the people involved in your project. For example, the customer is a stakeholder, so you might have to operate with them differently than, say, your producers or your vendors. And let's say you're working in a residential neighborhood. Though they might not be customers, residents of the neighborhood are also stakeholders. You might want to put out a notice so that they could be informed. And then we get down to our risk management plan. A risk is something that has been identified before it can happen. For example, if you're working on a construction project, there might be a risk of worker injury, specifically worker head injuries. Risks can be opportunities, which are positive, or threats, which are negative. And it is within those categories that we determine how we're going to manage those risks. And then finally, we get down to the procurement management plan. You're not allowed to go and spend money without an outline. Based off your organization, there might be a chain of command or a system of checks and balances that is required to enter into, execute, and close a contract with the vendor. And so if you notice, even though this is the planning process of when we're using the 10 knowledge areas, this will go throughout the project, even in predictive styles. We have our scope management plan for how we're going to control the scope of our project. We have our defined scope, and then we define our work breakdown structure. And so what is a work breakdown structure? In other words, we're taking our product scope and breaking it down into actual deliverables. The WBS dictionary then takes each effort and defines it within the 6 constraints: scope, schedule, cost, resources, quality, and risk. For example, if you were trying to build a car, the work breakdown structure might be divided into the tires, the engine, the frame, the windows. But within the category of the tires, there might be a difference in the dictionary of making and producing the rubber, defining the type of material that'll be used for the actual wheel. All of these elements add up into what we call our scope baseline. Within that scope, we then take our work breakdown structure, and then we estimate our resources available. And this is both internal and external resources. And you notice that after we define our scope, it makes it easier for us to define our schedule and our cost. Additionally, we need to take a look at our risks throughout the project. We then have to analyze that risk. There are some risks that'll be higher in priority than others. In summary, in a predictive project, most of your work is done in the first 2 phases of the project lifecycle: the initiation process and the planning process. And from there, you determine how you will execute, you determine how you will control, and you determine how you will close the project. So in this diagram, what we actually see is all the stages of the lifecycle development, because in agile projects, there's a lot of change that occurs. But the main goal, if you look towards the execution stage, is to continue the repeat cycle of what's called a sprint, which then leads us into a review or a demo. And that is the main gate where we can determine if the project is finished or if we need to go back and do some replanning. So after we develop our charter, you see that we get into the planning phase. And the planning phase in an agile project is not as detailed as a predictive project. We have our minimum viable product, which is our bare bones product that is functional, and then we're trying to add new functionality and bring it into the market. And then from there, we have our release plan, which is our tentative schedule of when we're going to be complete. When you think of a video game being developed, you might have it in the development stage now, but we're trying to get into the minimum viable product, which example could be the beta test. And then when we have that beta test, we then release that out in order to allow the team to test and work with the product. Our product backlog you could think of as a list of required features in order for the product to be complete. However, the product backlog can change throughout the project. It can be added to or taken away from in terms of features based off the needs of the person that we'll call our product owner. The product owner helps the team determine what is actually needed in order to reach a finished state for the project. For example, in a product backlog, you might have 5 things that are required in order for the project to be finished. However, as you're working on systems within the project, the product owner or the team might identify an additional feature that needs to be added. It'll go into the product backlog and be prioritized based off the need. When we sprint, we do a daily stand-up or a daily scrum, which is a short 15-minute meeting based off of 3 major questions. What have you done yesterday? What have you done today? And are there any impediments, obstacles, or blockers stopping you from your current work? The daily scrum is not a place to get into large conversations. It is simply a daily update on the status of the sprint. And then once you are complete with your sprint, you should have a number of user stories completed in terms of functionality, which is then where you go into the review session to see if you're ready to finish the project or if you must add more to the project. So, in summary, for the basis of project management, all projects from beginning to end go through 5 phases of the life cycle. There are also 10 knowledge areas which we have to continue to identify and study for what we'll do throughout the project. In a predictive plan, more work is done early on in the initiation and planning process with very little changes. However, in the Scrum or Agile method, we have our scope somewhat defined with changes that are to be expected, and then we have sprints to identify what is needed for functionality, and then we have review sessions to determine if we are done with our functionality or if we need to continue in terms of redevelopment. And with using this framework, you can then identify what type of project you're currently in. Just by understanding these basic skills, you are well on your way to understanding the essentials and the details of professionally developing yourself in the world of project management. If you would like to learn more about how you can become officially certified in project management, there are several steps required. You would have to take an official accredited project management bootcamp course. You would then have to submit for your application to take the test with the Project Management Institute. And you would have to pass the 180 question test in under 230 minutes. And once you've done all 3 things, you are an official project manager. For more details, here's the link to a bootcamp course that offers training and development in all 3 areas. It's PM Pro Learn. It's the resource that I used in order to score above target on my test and become a certified project manager.